The faint, sweet smell of coffee and rain-slicked pavement clung to the air, a scent Nora once found comforting. But on this Tuesday afternoon, it was the acidic stench of betrayal that filled her senses. It wasn't a lipstick-stained collar or a whispered late-night call that shattered her world. It was something far colder, far more final. A crumpled piece of glossy paper nestled amongst discarded sugar packets and lemon rinds in a sterile office trash can. It was the ghostly black and white image of their future, their promise, their baby, her ultrasound picture, the one he'd sworn to cherish forever. And as she stood there, the city's indifferent hum a million miles away, a single chilling question burned through her shock. What kind of man throws his own child in the trash? Nora traced the rim of her porcelain mug, the chamomile tea inside long gone cold. From their sprawling penthouse apartment on the 35th floor, the city lights of Boston glittered like a carpet of fallen stars. It was a view that had once made her feel on top of the world, a queen in a castle she and her husband Weber had built together. Tonight it just made her feel high up and terribly alone. Weber was a man sculpted by ambition, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to see right through you and a smile that could disarm the most hostile negotiator he had rocketed through the ranks of Harrison Capital, a ruthless private equity firm downtown. He was their golden boy, the senior vice president who could spin straw into gold, or so the financial magazines claimed. Nora had met him not in a boardroom, but in a dusty university library, where he'd been just a driven business student with worn-out sneakers and a habit of chewing on his pens. She fell for the boy, not the brand he would later become. Their life now was the picture of success. He wore tailored suits that cost more than her first car, and she curated a life of quiet elegance, managing charity galas and serving on the boards of art foundations. They were the perfect couple, the ones other people envied. And for the past 7 years they had been happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. The decision to start a family hadn't been rushed. They'd waited until Weber's position was secure, until the foundation of their life felt unshakable. When the little blue lines appeared on the test 3 months ago, it felt like the final perfect piece clicking into place. Weber had wept. He'd dropped to his knees, pressing his ear to her still flat stomach, whispering promises to the child they couldn't yet feel. He'd been obsessed with the first ultrasound. The grainy, indistinct image was to him the most beautiful work of art he'd ever seen. "Our masterpiece, Liv," he'd whispered, his voice thick with emotion as they looked at the photo that night. He insisted on getting the highest quality print, a glossy 5x7. He placed it in a silver frame on his bedside table, and for the first few weeks he'd look at it every night before turning off the light. But in the last month, a subtle chill had begun to creep into their warm, gilded cage. The silver frame was moved from his bedside table to the top of his tall dresser, and then a week ago it disappeared altogether. When Nora asked, he'd been dismissive, something Weber never was. "Oh, I put it somewhere safe, Liv," he'd said, loosening his tie as he walked in late from work, his face etched with a familiar weary stress. "With all the cleaning staff and everything, I didn't want it to get knocked over." It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it. The stress, however, was real. It had been mounting for months. Harrison Capital was in the middle of a hostile takeover of a smaller tech firm, a deal Weber was spearheading. The late nights became all-nighters. The easy laughter that used to fill their apartment was replaced by the tense staccato of his typing on his laptop deep into the night. He became distant, his blue eyes clouded over with concerns he refused to share. "It's just the deal, honey," he'd insist, kissing her forehead, a gesture that felt more automatic than affectionate. "It's a monster. Once it's closed, I'm all yours. We'll go to Tuscany, just the three of us." She tried to believe him. She wanted to. She'd make him his favorite meals only for him to push the food around his plate, his mind clearly 1,000 miles away in a downtown skyscraper. She'd try to initiate conversations about the baby names, nursery colors, birthing plans, and he would offer monosyllabic answers, his gaze fixed on the blinking light of his phone. A name started to surface in his hushed, tense phone calls: Chloe. No, Chloe. The numbers aren't adding up. Chloe, you need to handle the auditors. I'm relying on you, Chloe. Nora had asked about her once. Who's Chloe? She'd inquired, trying to sound casual as she arranged flowers in a vase. My associate, Weber had answered without looking up from his tablet. She's brilliant, a real lifesaver on this project. Nora had pictured a mousy, overworked analyst. She told herself this was what marriage was. You supported your partner through the high-stress times. You gave them space. But the space between them was growing into a chasm, and she was starting to fear she didn't know how to cross it. The man who wept with joy at the thought of their child was now a ghost in his own home, haunted by things he wouldn't name. And the photograph, their masterpiece, was nowhere to be found. She tried to quell the ugly suspicion coiling in her gut, the fear that the reason for his distance wasn't just a business deal, but a person, a lifesaver named Chloe. The chasm between them widened with each passing day. Weber started sleeping in the guest room, a decision he'd framed as a kindness. I'm up at all hours on calls with the London office. Liv, he'd explained, his face pale under the hallway light. I don't want to wake you. You and the baby need your rest. Rest was the one thing Nora couldn't get. She'd lie awake in their king-size bed, the empty space beside her, feeling like a physical ache. She could hear the muffled cadence of his voice through the wall, a low, urgent murmur that went on for hours. Sometimes she could make out words, not debentures or acquisitions, but pressure, timeline, and untenable. And more often, Chloe. The scent of another woman seemed to cling to him, not of cheap perfume, but of something more insidious, shared secrets, a private world Nora was not invited into. It was in the way his phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, was now perpetually in his pocket, screen down. It was in the new password on his laptop, a device that had once been as open between them as a book. One evening he came home smelling of coffee and a faint floral scent she didn't recognize. It wasn't her perfume. Long day, she asked, her voice tighter than she intended. You have no idea, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. We were holed up in the war room all day. I think I'm surviving on caffeine and sheer willpower. The war room, she echoed, picking up on the term he'd never used before. It's what we call the main conference room for this deal. It's intense. He paused, looking at her as if truly seeing her for the first time all day. You look tired, Liv. Are you feeling okay? The question felt like a deflection, a sudden pivot to her well-being to avoid discussing his. I'm pregnant, Weber. I'm always tired. And worried. About you. About us. He softened the hard lines around his eyes, easing for a moment. He walked over and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest. It was the first time he had initiated an embrace in weeks. She inhaled deeply, wanting to find the familiar scent of him, of home. But underneath his own cologne was that other scent, faint and floral. Chloe's perfume. The thought was a venomous dart. There is no us to worry about, he murmured into her hair. There's just the deal. It's almost over, I promise. Just a little longer. But the promise felt hollow. The next day a credit card statement arrived in the mail. It was their joint account, but Weber handled the finances. Nora usually shredded it without a glance. This time a knot of dread compelled her to open it. Her eyes scanned the familiar list of charges, their mortgage, groceries from Whole Foods, her prenatal yoga classes. And then, 2 entries that made her breath catch in her throat. A charge for $350 from Fleur Moore, a high-end florist in the financial district that specialized in extravagant bouquets. And another from the same day for dinner for 2 at Aria, an incredibly intimate and expensive Italian restaurant she and Weber had been wanting to try for years. He had always said they were saving it for a special occasion. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He hadn't brought her flowers. They hadn't gone to Aria. He'd told her he was working late that night, eating a sad desk sandwich with Chloe and the team. The lies were no longer subtle. They were brazen, documented in black and white. Who was he buying flowers for? Who was he taking to their special restaurant? The answer seemed sickeningly obvious. The seed of an idea, desperate and a little wild, began to take root in her mind. For weeks she had been a passive victim of his distance, waiting patiently for her husband to return to her. But patience had gotten her nothing but a cold bed and a heart full of fear. She needed to do something. She needed to see for herself. That Friday she called his office line, a number she hadn't dialed in years. A polite but firm secretary answered. "Harrison Capital, how may I direct your call?" "Weber Reed's office, please," Nora said, her voice betraying a slight tremor. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reed is in a meeting and has asked not to be disturbed. May I take a message?" "Oh," Nora said, thinking fast. "That's all right. I actually wanted to do something nice for him and the team. They've been working so hard. I was hoping to drop off some lunch for them. Could you tell me which conference room they're in?" There was a brief hesitation on the line. "Ma'am, Mr. Reed's team is spread across several offices, and he's actually in with Mr. Harrison himself right now." "Of course," Nora said, her mind racing. She remembered Weber mentioning a communal kitchen area on the executive floor where his team often gathered. "No problem at all. I'll just leave it in the executive lounge on the 45th floor. They can grab it when they're free. Thank you." She hung up her plan, solidifying. It wasn't just about lunch anymore. It was a reconnaissance mission. She would go to his world, the sterile, high-stakes environment that had stolen her husband. She would put a face to the name Chloe. She would walk into that building and find out what or who had replaced her and their baby in Weber's heart. She put on her favorite maternity dress, a soft blue cashmere that usually made her feel beautiful. Today it felt like armor. The elevator ride to the 45th floor of the Harrison Capitol building was nauseatingly swift. Nora clutched the handles of the insulated bag filled with artisanal sandwiches and gourmet salads, the extravagant lunch a flimsy pretext for her true purpose. The polished marble lobby with its soaring atrium and whisper-quiet employees felt like a foreign country. This was Weber's world, a world of power, money, and she feared secrets. The 45th floor was even more intimidating. Glass-walled offices overlooked the city, and people in impeccably tailored suits moved with a brisk, silent purpose. There was no friendly chatter, just the low hum of ventilation and the distant tapping of keyboards. She found the executive lounge, a chic minimalist space with a high-end espresso machine, a gleaming chrome refrigerator, and a row of discreet built-in cabinets for waste and recycling. It was utterly empty. A wave of foolishness washed over her. What had she expected? To walk in and find Weber canoodling with his associate over a photocopier. She was a desperate pregnant wife chasing ghosts in a corporate mausoleum. She set the lunch bag on the granite countertop, her resolve faltering. She should just leave. Go home and confront him tonight, armed with the credit card statement. As she turned to go, a custodian entered the lounge pushing a large wheeled trash receptacle. He moved with quiet efficiency, unlocking the cabinet beneath the counter marked mixed waste and pulling out a surprisingly full bin. Nora averted her eyes, a pang of embarrassment hitting her. She was intruding. But as the custodian lifted the plastic liner from the bin, a flash of something familiar caught her eye. Something small and glossy nestled amongst crumpled napkins and a discarded copy of the Wall Street Journal. Her heart stopped. It couldn't be. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The custodian, a kind-faced older man, paused and looked at her. "I'm so sorry this is going to sound crazy, but I think I might have accidentally thrown something away earlier. A photograph." The man grunted. "Happens all the time. Go on, take a look before I dump it." Her hands trembled as she leaned over the bin. The smell of stale coffee and lemon peels hit her, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on that glossy rectangle. With 2 fingers she carefully plucked it from the rubbish. And there it was. The world tilted on its axis. The air rushed from her lungs, replaced by an icy dread that spread through her veins. It was the 5x7 high-gloss print of their first ultrasound. Their masterpiece. There was a deep crease down the middle where it had been carelessly folded, and a dark, wet coffee stain marred the corner right over the spot where the technician had typed their baby's projected due date. It wasn't lost. It wasn't put somewhere safe. It was here, in the trash, discarded like a piece of meaningless office refuse. The kindness of the custodian, the sterile beauty of the lounge, the entire city outside the panoramic window, it all dissolved into a meaningless blur. The only reality was this desecrated image in her hand. This was not the act of a stressed man. This was not the carelessness of a busy executive. This was a statement. A deliberate, cruel rejection of her, of their child, of the life they had built. The flimsy excuses, the late nights, the secret dinners, the floral perfume, it all coalesced into a single horrific truth. He didn't want this baby. He didn't want her. He wanted a different life, a life with Chloe, a life where their unborn child was nothing more than trash to be thrown away. A sound escaped her throat, a choked, guttural sob of pure agony. The custodian looked at her with alarm. "Miss, are you all right?" But Nora couldn't answer. The grief was too immense, too suffocating. It was quickly being burned away, however, by something else, something hot and sharp and clarifying rage. The shock receded, and in its place rose a fury so potent it made her tremble. How dare he? How dare he smile at her, touch her, lie to her while doing this, while throwing their future into a bin like garbage? She would not crumble. She would not go home and cry. He would not get away with this quiet, cowardly betrayal. He would face her. He would face this. Her eyes blazing with a newfound terrible purpose scanned the hallway. She saw a young woman with a headset at a reception desk at the far end of the floor. She strode towards her, her steps echoing on the marble floor. The crumpled, coffee-stained ultrasound was clutched in her hand like a weapon. "Excuse me," Nora said, her voice dangerously calm. "I need to see my husband, Weber Reed, right now." The receptionist, a young woman named Jessica, looked up startled by her tone. "Ma'am, as I believe my colleague told you on the phone, he's in the main board meeting. It's the most important meeting of the year. No one can go in." Nora leaned forward, her knuckles white as she gripped the desk. She held up the soiled photograph. "I think they'll make an exception. Which way is it?" Jessica's eyes widened at the sight of the photo and the raw fury on Nora's face. She hesitated, stammering, "Ma'am, I wasn't asking for permission," Nora said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. She scanned the corridor and saw a pair of imposing dark mahogany doors at the very end. That had to be it. Without another word, she turned and walked towards them, her heart a war drum pounding in her ears. This was not just a confrontation. This was a detonation, and she was about to light the fuse. The walk down the long, silent corridor felt both like an eternity and an instant. Each step was fueled by a fresh wave of betrayal. The memory of Weber's tears when they saw the positive test, his hand on her belly, his whispered promises, lies, all of it lies. She heard the receptionist Jessica speaking frantically into her headset behind her, but the words were just buzzing noises. Nothing could stop her now. She reached the mahogany doors. They were heavy, solid, designed to keep the world out and secrets in. There was no handle, just a small silver keycard scanner. A security guard, a burly man who looked like he spent most of his day bored, suddenly stepped in her path, alerted by the call from the desk. "Ma'am, you can't go in there," he said, holding up a hand. His tone was firm but not aggressive. Nora didn't even break her stride. She looked him dead in the eye. "I am Nora Reed. My husband is in that room and he is about to see me." There was something in her voice, a raw, unshakable certainty that made the guard falter for a fraction of a second. That was all the time she needed. She sidestepped him, reached for the seam between the two heavy doors and pushed. They were unlocked. The world inside went silent. It was a scene of immense corporate power. A long, polished table reflected the recessed ceiling lights. About a dozen people, mostly men in dark suits, were seated around it. At the head of the table sat a formidable-looking man with silver hair and a stern, weathered face, Mr. Harrison, she presumed. Her husband Weber was standing by a large screen, a laser pointer in his hand mid-sentence. And a few seats down from Mr. Harrison sat a young woman with sleek dark hair and wide, intelligent eyes. Chloe. She was exactly as beautiful as Nora had feared. Every single head swiveled towards the doors towards her. The murmuring stopped. The presentation on the screen was frozen. Weber stared at her, his mouth still slightly agape from the word he had been about to say. The color drained from his face, his blue eyes wide with a mixture of shock and sheer panic. Nora. He breathed the name, a fragile question in the tomb-like silence. She ignored him. Her focus was absolute. She walked slowly, deliberately into the center of the room, her gaze sweeping over the powerful, confused faces staring back at her. She felt their judgment, their annoyance at this bizarre interruption. She didn't care. Let them stare. She stopped at the foot of the massive table directly opposite Mr. Harrison. She held up her hand, and in the silent, pressurized room the crinkling sound of the folded, stained ultrasound photo was as loud as a gunshot. She let her eyes find Weber's again. He looked like a man on the edge of a cliff. "I believe this belongs to you," Nora said, her voice ringing with a cold, clear fury that she didn't know she possessed. She unfurled the photograph and held it up for him, for all of them to see. The ghostly image of their baby marred by the brown coffee stain. "I found it, in the trash." A collective gasp, soft but audible, rippled through the room. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Chloe's face went from pale to ashen. She looked down at her hands on the table as if willing herself to disappear. Mr. Harrison's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing into icy slits, not of confusion, but of pure, unadulterated anger. Weber was completely frozen, his laser pointer still clutched in his hand. He looked from the photo to Nora's face, a desperate, silent plea in his eyes. "Liv, don't. Not here. Not here." She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Where, Weber? Where is the right place to find out that our baby, our masterpiece, means so little to you that you can just throw it away with the garbage? Should I have waited until you came home tonight and lied to my face again? Should I have politely ignored the flowers you bought for another woman, the special occasion dinner you had while I was at home alone carrying your child?" Every word was a perfectly aimed blow. She saw him flinch. She saw Chloe shrink further into her chair. "This is highly inappropriate." Mr. Harrison boomed, his voice like gravel. "Whatever domestic squabble this is, it has no place at Harrison Capital. Get her out of here, Weber." The command broke Weber's paralysis. He took a step toward her, his hands outstretched. "Nora, please, let's go. We can talk about this. This is not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like?" she screeched, pulling the photo back to her chest, as if he might try to snatch it. "It looks like my husband is a liar. It looks like he's having an affair with his brilliant associate." She shot a venomous glare at Chloe, who visibly recoiled. "And it looks like neither of you wants the baby that's going to inconvenience your little romance." "That's enough." Weber's voice was sharp, desperate. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "I know what I found," she fired back, her voice cracking with the pain she had been holding back. "And I know what it means." She turned her burning gaze back to the head of the table, to the powerful man who was clearly in charge of this whole pathetic circus. "And you," she said to Mr. Harrison, "you should know what kind of man you have managing your most important deals. A man who treats his own family like garbage. What do you think he'll do with your company when the pressure gets to be too much?" Mr. Harrison stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. His face was a mask of cold fury. "Security," he said, his voice lethally quiet, speaking towards the open doors. "Remove this woman, now." Weber rushed to her side, grabbing her arm. "Liv, come on, you've done enough." His grip was surprisingly strong, his panic palpable. She ripped her arm away from him. The fight went out of her as suddenly as it had come, replaced by a deep, crushing wave of exhaustion. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only the hollowed-out shell of her grief. "You're right," she said, her voice dropping to a desolate whisper. She looked at Weber at the wreckage of the man she loved, standing amidst the ruins of his career. "I have. It's all done." She turned her back on him on all of them and walked out of the boardroom. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She could feel the weight of their stares, the silent, catastrophic fallout of the bomb she had just detonated. The mahogany doors swung shut behind her, sealing them all in with the mess she had made. The walk away from the boardroom was a blur. Nora moved on autopilot, past the stunned face of the security guard, past the wide-eyed receptionist Jessica, who averted her gaze as if witnessing something too private, too painful to observe. She didn't wait for the elevator. She found the fire stairs and began her descent from the 45th floor, each concrete step a jarring reminder of her new reality. The fury that had propelled her had evaporated, leaving behind a chilling, profound emptiness. She was halfway home in a cab, the city streaking by in a watercolor of rain and neon, when her phone began to buzz incessantly. Weber. She ignored the first call, and the second. On the third, a string of frantic text messages began to pop up on her screen. "Liv, please pick up. You don't understand what you just did. It's not about Chloe. It was never about Chloe. Please, I need to talk to you. Meet me." The messages were a confusing jumble of denial and desperation. Not about Chloe. The man was a pathological liar. The evidence was irrefutable: the dinner, the flowers, the discarded photo. His pleas felt like just another layer of manipulation. She silenced her phone and tossed it into her purse, the buzzing vibrations against the leather, a faint, annoying echo of her shattered life. When she got back to the penthouse, the silence was deafening. Every object a framed photo from their wedding, the book he'd left on the coffee table, the expensive throw blanket he'd bought her, was a testament to a life that was now a lie. She walked into their bedroom and sank onto the edge of the bed, the cashmere of her dress no longer feeling like armor, but like a costume for a role she could no longer play. An hour later, she heard a key in the lock. Her entire body tensed. Weber burst in, his hair disheveled, his tie ripped loose, his face pale and strained. He looked completely undone. "Liv," he started, his voice ragged. "Get out," she said, her own voice flat and devoid of emotion. She couldn't even look at him. "Just listen to me. 5 minutes. That's all I ask. You blew up my entire career. You owe me 5 minutes." The sheer audacity of his words, blaming her, sparked a flicker of the earlier fire. "I owe you. You threw our child in the trash, Weber. We're done. There's nothing to talk about." "I did," he said, and the simple, stark admission made her finally look up. He wasn't trying to deny it. He looked broken. "I threw it away, and it was the most disgusting, unforgivable thing I've ever done in my life. But you have to believe me, Liv. The reason you think I did it, it's not the truth." He sank into the armchair opposite the bed, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. It was the first time she had seen him cry since the day they'd found out she was pregnant. The sight was deeply unsettling. "I wasn't having an affair," he said, his voice muffled by his hands. "The dinner at Aria, it was with Chloe, yes, but it was also with her father, a senior banking regulator. We were trying to get unofficial advice on the takeover. The flowers, they were a thank you gift to Chloe's mother for hosting a last-minute meeting at her house when we thought our office was bugged." The explanation was so elaborate, so specific, that it sounded like a well-rehearsed lie. "Bugged," Nora scoffed. "Now you're paranoid on top of being a cheat." He lifted his head, and his eyes were raw with a pain that looked different from guilt. It looked like fear. "I'm not paranoid, Liv. I'm terrified. The deal? It's not just a deal. It's a house of cards. Harrison is forcing me to cook the books to falsify the due diligence reports. The tech firm we're acquiring is almost bankrupt. Harrison knows it. He's buying it to strip its assets and patents, and he's setting me up to be the fall guy when the whole thing implodes after the merger. The Securities and Exchange Commission is already sniffing around." Nora stared at him. her mind struggling to process the sudden jarring shift in narrative. This was not the simple sordid affair she had braced herself for. This was something else entirely, something bigger and more dangerous. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. "Harrison has been grooming me for this for a year." Weber continued, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "He promoted me, gave me a huge salary, this apartment. He made me dependent on him. He knew we were trying for a baby. He's been using it, telling me I have too much to lose, that I need to protect my family. He's got me cornered. I've been working with Chloe to find a way out, to gather proof without him knowing. She's been risking her own career trying to help me." He got up and started pacing, his agitation filling the room. "This afternoon before the meeting, Harrison called me into his office. He basically spelled it out. He said that when the investigation comes, a man with a pregnant wife and a mountain of debt is a very believable, very desperate-looking scapegoat. He told me that family can be a liability, a distraction." Weber stopped pacing and looked at her, his face a mask of self-loathing. "I walked out of his office feeling completely hopeless, trapped. I felt like this life, this baby, it was all just leverage he was using against me. I walked into the lounge to get a coffee and I saw the photo. I'd taken it out of my wallet to look at it. And in that one single terrible moment, I saw what he saw. A liability, a weakness. I felt so worthless, so incapable of protecting you that I threw it away. It was like I was throwing away my own failure." He sank to his knees in front of her, his hands gripping his own hair. "It wasn't about not wanting our baby live. God, no. It was about feeling like I didn't deserve him, that I was going to fail him before he was even born. It was a moment of madness, of despair. And I am so, so sorry." The silence in the room was thick with the weight of his confession. Nora looked at his crumpled form, at the genuine agony etched on his face. Her carefully constructed story of infidelity was beginning to crack. Could this insane, terrifying story be true? She thought back to the boardroom, to Mr. Harrison's face. It wasn't just the annoyance of an interrupted meeting. It was cold, predatory fury. It was the look of a man whose carefully laid plans had just been threatened. And Chloe, she hadn't looked guilty. She had looked terrified. Her gaze fell on her purse, on the phone inside. The phone with the texts from Weber. "You don't understand what you just did." Her dramatic entrance hadn't just exposed a non-existent affair. She had in front of the entire board accused the golden boy, the chosen scapegoat, of being unstable and untrustworthy right at the project's most critical moment. She hadn't just detonated her marriage. She may have inadvertently lit the fuse on Weber's entire professional and legal life, trapping him even further in Harrison's web. The truth she was beginning to realize was infinitely more complicated and far more terrifying than a simple betrayal. The days that followed were lived in a strange, suspended reality. The penthouse, once a symbol of their success, now felt like a luxurious prison, a silent witness to their fractured trust. Nora didn't forgive. Weber couldn't, not yet. The image of the ultrasound in the trash was a wound that was still too raw. But his terrifying confession had shifted the very ground beneath her feet. She had stormed into that boardroom to fight for her marriage, only to discover her husband was embroiled in a war she knew nothing about. They coexisted in a state of fragile truce. They slept in separate rooms, their conversations stilted and focused only on the practical. Weber was placed on immediate indefinite leave from Harrison Capital pending an internal investigation into the events of the board meeting. It was a thinly veiled attempt to isolate him, to cut him off from company resources and allies. His corporate credit cards were canceled. His remote access to the servers was revoked. Harrison was tightening the noose. Weber spent his days on the phone with lawyers, his voice a low, anxious hum that seeped through the walls. He looked haunted, sleeping in fits and starts, losing weight he couldn't afford to lose. The confident, charming man she married had been replaced by a ghost, stalked by the looming threat of financial ruin and federal prison. Nora found herself watching him not with the anger of a betrayed wife, but with a growing, complicated fear. She was tethered to him not just by their marriage certificate and the child growing inside her, but by the disaster she had unknowingly helped accelerate. Her public accusation had given Harrison the perfect excuse to paint Weber as volatile and unstable, the ideal profile for a fall guy. 2 days after the boardroom incident, Nora was sorting through a pile of mail when she saw an official-looking envelope from her bank. It was a confirmation of a wire transfer she didn't recognize. Her heart pounded as she tore it open. It confirmed the transfer of $50,000 from their joint savings account into a new individual account in her name only. It had been executed the morning of the board meeting. She confronted Weber holding the letter. "What is this? Were you planning on leaving?" He looked at the paper and then at her, his eyes weary. "No, Liv. I was trying to protect you. I knew things were going to get bad. Harrison had started making threats. I figured if the feds came, they would freeze all my assets, our joint accounts included. I moved that money to make sure you and the baby had something no matter what happened to me. It was all I could think to do." His words hit her with the force of a physical blow. While she had been nursing her suspicions of an affair, he had been planning for a catastrophe, trying to build a financial lifeboat for his family. The gesture was clumsy, panicked, and deeply telling. It wasn't the action of a man abandoning his family. It was the desperate act of a man who felt he was drowning. That evening, her doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. Peering through the peephole, she was shocked to see Chloe standing in the hallway, looking small and nervous, clutching the strap of her shoulder bag. Nora's first instinct was to slam the door in her face. This woman was still in her mind, tangled up in the web of lies. But Weber's confession and the bank transfer had planted a seed of doubt. She opened the door a crack. "What do you want?" Nora asked, her voice cold. "Please," Chloe said, her voice trembling slightly. "Can I come in?" "It's about Weber. It's about what's happening." Reluctantly, Nora let her in. Chloe stood awkwardly in the grand foyer, looking overwhelmed by the opulence of the apartment. She was younger than Nora had thought, and up close she didn't look like a seductress. She looked like a terrified graduate student. "He's telling you the truth," Chloe said, getting straight to the point. "About everything. Harrison is burying him, and I think I'm next." They sat in the formal living room, a space Nora rarely used, the two of them perched on the edges of plush sofas. "Why should I believe you?" Nora asked, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. "Because I was there," Chloe said, her eyes meeting Nora's. "I saw Harrison manipulate him for months. I saw him change the numbers on the projection sheets Weber had prepared. I saw him delete emails that would have proven the tech company was a lemon. Weber was fighting him, trying to find a legal way to blow the whistle without violating his NDA. But Harrison had him trapped." Chloe reached into her bag and pulled out a slim USB drive. "Weber doesn't know I have this. When Harrison's IT people came to scrub our computers after the incident, I copied my entire hard drive. It's all here." The original due diligence reports Weber wrote, the altered ones Harrison submitted. Email chains between Harrison and the board where he talks about managing the fallout and containing the liability, referring to Weber. It's not enough to convict him, maybe, but it's enough to prove Weber isn't the one who committed the fraud. Nora stared at the small piece of plastic in Chloe's hand. It was the key to everything. "Why are you doing this? You're risking everything." Chloe's eyes filled with tears. "Because Weber is a good man. He's been protecting me too. My father. The banking regulator Weber told you about Harrison knows about him. He threatened to ruin my father's reputation, to fabricate a story about him taking bribes if I didn't play along and support the official story. Weber told me to save myself, to just corroborate Harrison's version of events. But I can't. I can't let them send an innocent man to prison." In that moment, Nora's anger finally truly dissolved, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. She and Chloe were not rivals. They were two completely different women who had been caught in the blast radius of the same man's ruthless ambition. Harrison had underestimated both of them. He saw one as a liability and the other as a brilliant associate he could control. He never imagined they would one day be sitting in the same room forming an alliance. Nora stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights that had once seemed so magical. They now looked cold and predatory. "What you did at that board meeting," Chloe said softly from behind her. "You thought you were exposing an affair. But what you really did was show everyone that Weber had a distraction, a weakness. You gave Harrison the perfect weapon to use against him. You made him look exactly like the desperate, out-of-control man Harrison needed him to be." The words stung, but they were true. Nora's pain had been a tool sharpened and aimed by a man she'd never even met. She turned around, her decision made. "Okay," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "He underestimated us. Let's show him what a liability and an associate can do together." The plan was audacious, risky, and hinged entirely on the arrogance of one man, Mr. Harrison. Nora, Weber, and Chloe spent the next 48 hours in a state of high alert, fueled by coffee and a desperate unifying purpose. Weber, using Chloe's data and his own intimate knowledge of Harrison's tactics, pieced together a complete timeline of the fraud. Chloe, meanwhile, used a burner phone to discreetly contact a board member she knew was a rival of Harrison's, a man named Mr. Peterson, who had looked more intrigued than appalled during Nora's boardroom outburst. She fed him just enough information to whet his appetite, hinting that Harrison's Weber problem was merely the tip of a very large, very dangerous iceberg. The linchpin of their plan, however, was Nora. She was the unpredictable element, the emotional wild card Harrison had already dismissed. She called Harrison's office line directly. His secretary, a woman with a voice like ice, tried to block her, but Nora was insistent. "Tell Mr. Harrison that the hysterical pregnant wife has something he needs to see. Tell him it pertains to his future, not my husband's." It was a gamble, but she knew Harrison's ego wouldn't allow him to ignore such a direct challenge. To her surprise, he agreed to see her, alone, in the same boardroom. Walking into that room again was surreal. This time there was no crowd, just Mr. Harrison sitting at the head of the long table, a smug, contemptuous look on his face. He gestured to the chair at the opposite end of the table, a clear power play. "Mrs. Reed," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "to what do I owe this encore performance?" Nora walked not to the chair he indicated, but to the one directly to his right. She placed her purse on the table with a soft thud. "I'm here to offer you a deal, Mr. Harrison." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "You a deal? Your husband is facing professional ruin and a likely federal indictment brought on by your little tantrum, and you think you're in a position to negotiate. My tantrum," Nora said, her voice perfectly level, "was the best thing that ever happened to you. It gave you the perfect narrative. The brilliant executive brought down by his own chaotic personal life. It's clean. It's believable, but narratives can change." She reached into her purse and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a printout of an email, one of the key pieces of evidence from Chloe's USB drive. It was an email from Harrison to his personal lawyer dated 2 months prior, in which he outlined a strategy to insulate the firm by creating a firewall around Weber Reed in the event of a negative outcome with the tech acquisition. Harrison's smug expression faltered for a second as he glanced at it. "Where did you get this? Let's just say a very brilliant associate of yours felt her loyalty was misplaced," Nora said. She then pulled out a second item from her purse, Chloe's USB drive. She placed it on the polished table between them. "This contains every original file, every altered document, every email you thought you had scrubbed. It contains the entire unchangeable truth of your fraud." Harrison stared at the drive, his jaw tight. "This is absurd. Blackmail." "No," Nora corrected him. "This is your choice. Right now there are 2 copies of this drive in existence. This one," she tapped the one on the table, "and another one that is set to be delivered to the SEC and the U.S. Attorney's Office via a lawyer's messenger service in exactly 1 hour. Unless, of course, the delivery is canceled." His face for the first time showed a flicker of genuine fear. "What do you want?" he rasped. "It's very simple. Nora said, leaning forward. "You are going to call an emergency board meeting. In that meeting, you are going to announce your immediate retirement for personal health reasons. You will also announce that after a thorough internal review, Weber Reed has been completely exonerated of any wrongdoing, and that in fact, his diligence saved the company from a potentially disastrous merger. You are going to publicly praise him. Then you are going to authorize a severance package for him that is commensurate with his contributions and the emotional distress this process has caused. A very, very generous package." Harrison was silent, his mind clearly racing. "And one more thing," Nora added. "You will ensure that Chloe is promoted and protected. Her career will not be touched." He looked from the USB drive to her face, searching for a bluff. He found none. He had built his empire on bullying and intimidation on the assumption that everyone had a price or a breaking point. He never accounted for someone who had already lost everything and therefore had nothing left to fear. The board meeting an hour later was a masterclass in corporate theater. A humbled, somber Mr. Harrison announced his retirement. Mr. Peterson, the rival board member Chloe had primed, looked on with keen interest, already positioning himself for the power vacuum. Weber was publicly vindicated, his name cleared in front of the very people who had witnessed his humiliation. 2 weeks later, Nora and Weber sat not in their cavernous penthouse, but on a cardboard box in a much smaller sun-filled apartment across the river. They had sold the penthouse, severing the last tie to Harrison's gilded cage. The money from the severance was enough to give them a fresh start far away from the toxic world of high finance. Their marriage wasn't magically healed. Trust once shattered had to be rebuilt piece by piece. There were still moments of pain, silence, conversations that were left unfinished. But something new was growing between them, a battle-tested partnership. They had faced down the monster together. Weber reached over and placed a hand on Nora's swollen belly. The baby kicked a strong, reassuring thump. "He's a fighter," Weber said, a real gentle smile reaching his eyes for the first time in months. Nora corrected him, smiling back. "She gets it from her mother." They were scarred, they were changed, but they were free. They had walked through the fire and found their way out. Not back to the perfect life they'd lost, but toward a new one, a truer one that they would build together. A wife's worst nightmare. The chilling discovery of a discarded ultrasound became the fuse for a story no one could have predicted. What began as a tale of domestic betrayal unraveled into a high-stakes corporate conspiracy, proving that sometimes the greatest deceptions aren't whispered in secret phone calls, but signed off on in sterile boardrooms. Nora walked into that building expecting to confront a cheating husband, but found herself fighting a war for her family's very survival. It's a raw, unflinching look at how far we'll go to protect the ones we love, and how in the face of true evil, the most unlikely alliances can forge the strongest weapons. If this story of shattered trust and incredible resilience resonated with you, please hit that like button to let us know. Don't forget to share it with someone who appreciates a story where the truth is always more complex than it seems. And for more gripping real-life dramas every week, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next.